Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today,
Assalamualaikum. I think Rabbi Sab's stream dropped, so today we are. I'll just try to cover until he can get back on. But I think we are covering Azur's Friday sermon from earlier this morning, and also some Jalsa Salana points. Mohtam Sab, Ibrahim Bhai, do you have any points you'd like to start off with?
Yeah, Jazakallah Rahman Bhai. As you all know, we just wrapped up Jalsa Salana UK, and beloved Hazur Talib bin Nasr al-Aziz delivered a khutbah this afternoon, which we all listened to, where Hazur talked about appreciating the workers and volunteers who served in the Jalsa and shared some of the experiences that the people had for Jalsa all across the world. Essentially, this became a world Jalsa, a true Almi Jalsa. So one point that stuck out to me was that, when Hazur talked about the volunteers who helped out in the parking lot, taking the cars out of the mud, getting dirty, and not looking at anything else but serving the Jamaat, and the Hazur very lovingly called them the jinn. They work like jinn, and in a way that, these are the people that have been granted to the blessed Jamaat of Promised Messiah, alayhi salam, and then, we can truly see that. So
yeah, one thing Huzur mentioned also in the khutbah was that these were the people who were ready from the very beginning. Like one interesting point Huzur made was that there was some hesitancy among the office or the organizers of Jalsa that will it even happen? They were a little bit relaxed about it and that sort of thing. And there Huzur had to kind of give them a strong reminder that you can all be replaced if you're not going to do this work. But then Huzur said that then when the call was put out, everybody was just ready to go. So it kind of shows that we who are in a position of office holders, sometimes maybe we underestimate the strength of the passion of people who are on the ground. And also, I mean, that point when Azur said it, it was a reminder for me as well, that if I ever think that I'm like not expendable, that I'm special, that like the Jamaat needs me, that, the Hazur can replace me with anybody else and they'll do a better job than me. So I should always consider it a blessing and an opportunity to be able to sacrifice.
And I think on the point, the standard of service in our volunteers, we have a variety of people, from people who may work some odd jobs to people who are at the top of their fields, and they all carry the same service. And specifically the parking team, I was stuck in the mud twice, and these guys had probably pushed out hundreds of cars at this point. And I remember, like, I was surprised because I was one of the last people to leave, and these guys still had a smile on their face, and they were serving. They were covered in mud, and I think Hazur mentioned in his khutbah today as well. This is something that other people see and that we may take for granted, that our volunteers serve with this humility, this kind of standard of service where they're happy being covered in mud, even though at work they may be at the top of their field.
And I think one of the things that drove them, what was very interesting to hear, was, Hazur Anwar mentioned himself that once while he was serving, his head was covered with mud, and this fueled them that, if Khalifatul Masih, and this became a driver for them as well. So we saw that glimpses on MTA when these guys were pulling cars, and Hazur said literally pulling them out of the mud. So
yeah. One takeaway that I had from today's Friday sermon in particular is, the fact that those who are non-Ahmadi Muslims were so inspired that they said that not only are we going to accept Ahmadiyyat, but a lot of people were saying that our life has changed and things like that. So that made me think that, as an Ahmadi, how inspired am I by Jalsa, by Huzur? Because that's just a reflection on me. Because the thing is that nobody has a monopoly on God's favor. If somebody is a Christian and they're sincerely looking for God, then God appreciates that. And when they see the blessings of Khilafat and when they see these things, they're inspired by it. I, being a born and raised Ahmadi Muslim, if I don't have that spirit in my heart, I'm going to be blind to that light. That light is just something you can only see if your heart is illuminated. So, those stories that Huzur mentioned today of how much people who are outside the Jamaat, just people who got invited, Huzur mentioned the people who just casually came in. They were just like, all right, I got invited by this Jamaat to come and sit in front of a TV and watch their Jalsa. I'll do it because it is a favor to them. They show up and they're so inspired that their life has changed. So I think that's really a point of reflection for me and for us as Ahmadis, that if non-Ahmadis, people who are not even Muslims in some cases, got that inspired, then we need to be, have more of a spiritual insight to be able to see these blessings and miracles.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mohtam.
No, go ahead, Rahman.
So yeah, for me, I think that same thing is Rabbi Sa was mentioning was a takeaway for me from Jalsa and the khutbah today, is that I think as Ahmadis we take a lot for granted, specifically the blessings of Khilafat, right? when I was at Jalsa, I was lucky to be there. I remember looking at Lawaya Ahmadiyya waving in the air, and I had a realization, like, before this was something that was expected. Every year I'm going to come to Jalsa, whether it's USA or UK or wherever it is, and this flag's going to be waving, and Hazur is going to address us, and this is something that's going to happen. And I think after a year and a half of this pandemic, and we've still been getting the Friday sermons, which is such a big blessing. I think we all remember when there was a 1 or 2 weeks when we didn't get Friday sermons, and that was the first time I think in Hazur's Khilafat we didn't get that. But I think we've kind of been spoiled, and even just sitting at Jummah, right, sitting down, I was getting tired. I don't know if you saw the khutbah, but if you saw, every time probably the camera came on me, I was in a different position. But I think about Hazur being 70 plus years old, and he's standing there for an hour, and then during the Jalsa days, standing for 4 or 5 hours at a time preparing these speeches, all this, and this is such a big blessing that others are recognizing, like Rabbi Saab said. But I think we as MD sometimes take for granted, and I think this pandemic maybe gives us a little bit of perspective. But I think we can do a lot more to appreciate this.
Yeah, and it also gives you a perspective that how Allah Ta'ala guides the one who are pure-hearted. Also, as Rabbi Saab said that, there, as you mentioned, that there's other people who might be following a different faith, but they're just, they're looking for that light. They're looking for something in their life. And this Jalsa truly becomes an understanding that this was established by promised Messiah alayhi salam himself. And this gathering is such a spiritual gathering that it can truly create a spiritual revolution among not just the members of the Jamaat itself, but outside all the non-MDs across the world.
Yeah. And that's something to an extent I felt, because here in Houston, we had, it was nice at the local Jamaat. We organized a gathering on Sunday for the closing session. And I remember in the beginning, Hazur had said that when you're watching the Jalsa from around the world, you should watch it as if you're physically here. And I heard that, but I didn't really act on it. Because, when we're watching Jalsa at home, we're just leaning back on the couch, just doing it casually. Sometimes it comes on early in the morning, you're laying in bed. But on Sunday, to get together at the masjid, and, I think, Rahman, you said that, when you know that all these people are here for the same reason, they're here for love of Khilafat, to serve. So just coming into the masjid, it's just a few people. It's not like something major. Maybe there was like 20 people there, but just to sit around people in Houston who I know came here just to watch Hazur, just out of an enthusiasm for Jalsa, then to sit there and sit up straight in front and just out of respect that I'm sitting in Hazur's, as if I'm sitting in Hazur's presence, listen to the whole speech. It was definitely a different experience. And that's something that Hazur mentioned in today's speech as well, that where people, they gathered together, they did experience that kind of a different experience. And alhamdulillah, even though I wasn't able to be a Jalsa like you were, but just sitting in Houston, I was able to get a fraction of that, which was different than sitting at home on the couch. Yeah. So now coming, I guess we discussed some points on Jalsa. We discussed some points on, the Friday sermon that Hazur mentioned. So before going into action items, are there any other points that come to mind, maybe from the Jalsa that stuck out to you, or the Friday sermon, before we go into action items?
I guess I can go first. I think we all just experienced this wonderful blessing of Jalsa, and as Hazur mentioned that this was one of the Jalsas where new doors were opened up for the Jamaat, where people were connected virtually, like you said, Murabi Saab, in Houston, different parts of the world, and glimpses of these places were being shown on MTN. It was so wonderful and heartwarming to see that. Places in Africa, India, late night, Qadian, I could see, lights were, it was dark out and people were watching the speeches. Now, just going back to something that stuck out with me was really, Hazur as Khalifatul Masih, understanding what's the need for the Jamaat and the spiritual thirst of the Jamaat. And that's where I saw that, this Jalsa was so necessary for all of us, that we needed this. And I felt that, this was a way for us to really focus on, on that understanding that, how can we increase and tread the path of righteousness, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is something that stuck out with me, as far as Jalsa, and particularly the point which mentioned earlier, where you mentioned that, some of the senior members of the organizing team didn't believe that Jalsa could happen based on the situation in UK. But by the grace of Allah, just the words of Khalifatul Masih were blessed, and we saw that Jalsa happen in the best manner possible, where everybody was able to connect.
And it seems like Hazur knew how badly we needed Jalsa, because from the very beginning he said that Jalsa is going to happen. And even though everywhere else in the world, it just wasn't even on the table, it just seems like, okay, with the cases of COVID and everything like that, it's just not possible. But in UK, it ended up happening. And then Rahman, maybe you can tell us, what were the numbers of COVID before Jalsa and what are they now? There's just there's something special as to why it was able to happen there.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. Right before Jalsa, there was a dip in cases, and for my own reasons, I wanted to see where the cases are now, and it seems like they're increasing again. So I feel like that's a sign for us that God made the slight dip to make maybe Jalsa more easy for us, and now that Jalsa is done, then cases may go up. But I mean, it was really, you could tell it was very neat, especially the environment there. I remember on Thursday, Hazur, when he led the first namaz, um, and since the pandemic started for Jalsa, he was Thursday Zohar namaz. And I remember I could feel like the way everyone stood when Hazur walked in, and these are they're not like us Americans where we don't get to taste that prayer all the time. These guys were used to praying Jan Hazur whenever they felt like drive 40 minutes to Islamabad or 10-15 minutes to Southfields. So they experienced what we experienced, but they, I think, have a little bit stronger connection since they can pray behind Hazur whenever. And I remember feeling what everyone else was feeling just off the energy in the room, and it was a really incredible moment. And I think, I mean, if we can move into action items, my action item is recognizing this enormous blessing and reflecting on what we can do to become deserving of this blessing, right? In terms of progressing towards God, because it's all we have.
Yeah. I mean, that is a good action item, because the thing is that, like, when we experience this Jalsa, in principle, it's not that different. Like, we've always been watching Jalsas on MTA. We've always been doing all these things, but this time there was something different where there was a direct connection where everybody was considered themselves as participants in the Jalsa. And so, like, that's something where is a unique thing about this Jalsa. And I mean, we could definitely make it into an action item, even with Jummah khutbas and things like that. If we take that same experience of this Jalsa and then visualize that I'm sitting there in front of Huzur and Huzur is addressing me, then, like, that could definitely, like, change the way that we benefit from those khutbas. So for Ibrahim Bhai, what was the action item that you had in mind?
Yeah, the action item for me was something that Hazur mentioned in today's khutbah, and something that just I pondered even as we went through Jalsa, is that connecting ourselves more with MTA. And I felt that Hazur mentioned even that Ahmadi should focus on that. And personally, Alhamdulillah, when Jalsa had finished, we continued to keep MTA on and continue to listen the speeches of a beloved Hazur on repeat, because the words of Khalifatul Masih, we cannot comprehend all the meaning in one go. We have to listen to it over and over again and continue to gain wisdom and blessings from it. So one action item for me just going forward is just making sure that I spend enough time during the day, and just keeping MTA on and just staying connected, especially with the speeches of beloved Hazur and anything else that comes on MTA, which is there for our for us to benefit from. So
And for me, my action item is to not just, like, hear the message of Huzur when he gives it, but connecting back to what I said before, there has to be a feeling of inspiration. Otherwise, we're missing something. Huzur doesn't just give speeches to teach us about the philosophy and give us certain, like, references. No, it's like it's meant to create a fire in our heart. So I guess what I learned from this Jalsa is that is entirely possible. I mean, that kind of enthusiasm and emotion I felt just sitting in my local masjid around other Ahmadis, that was always possible. I can feel sitting in my living room, sitting with my family as well. So I think, like, my action item going forward is that me listening to the Friday sermon or me listening to Huzur is not just about, did I learn the points, did I make some notes, did I learn something new, but it's about, to what extent was I inspired? Because this is the point of it, and that's the fire that we're supposed to create within ourselves. I mean, and one of those things, especially those Jalsa documentaries, that they're there to, like, kind of create that enthusiasm and fire, give you an inside look, show how other people are benefiting from those blessings, so we can benefit from them as well. So that's my action item of, like, of analyzing myself in that way and benefiting spiritually and getting inspired by each speech.
I'll take that on as well. I like that action.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of today's show. So I appreciate Rahman Bhai and then Ibrahim Bhai for joining in this discussion on the Friday sermon and also the Jalsa that took place recently. For those who are joining from home, what we always remind you is that along with listening to Huzur's speech, his Friday sermon, and also his Jalsa speeches, our objective here is also to come up with an action item that then we do in the following upcoming week. So it doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be life-changing or major. Even if we do something small, but we do it with the intention that I'm acting on what Huzur just guided me on this last Friday, then it carries a different thing that an Ahmadi Muslim has as a follower of Khilafat, getting fresh guidance from someone who's chosen from Allah Almighty. So I encourage you also to come up with an action item and then to try your best to follow through on it in this upcoming week. So that brings us to the end of today's show, Friday, 13th August, which is Huzur's speech on the blessings of the Jalsa Salana that took place last week. And with that, we bring today's show to an end. Jazakallah and Assalamu alaikum.